Good evening. I want you to focus on the following paradox built around two seemingly contrary facts. Fact one, over 240 years of history, we have an unbroken record of civilian control of the military in the United States. Not a coup, not even a threat of a coup. Fact two, every president and every secretary of defense since the end of World War II has come into office believing that they had to reassert civilian control of the military, believing that civilian control of the military had receded or eroded under their predecessor. An unbroken record of civilian control, an unbroken record of worrying about civilian control. What explains this paradox is a civil-military empathy gap, and you're going to help me close that, I hope. So where is civilian concerns about civilian control coming from? Well, it's coming from a record of civil-military friction. We haven't had a coup, but we've had a lot of civil-military tension. So bad that Secretary of Defense Forrestal had a nervous breakdown and committed suicide over civil-military tensions in the late 40s. So bad that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff under Richard Nixon arranged for a stenographer to spy on the White House, to root through the garbage and report back to the Pentagon what Nixon and Kissinger were up to. So bad that the press declared President Clinton's presidency over before it had even reached the 100-day mark, because President Clinton was so wrapped around the axle on the gays and the military controversy. Now, I was giving this litany at another workshop, and a senior officer from a country in our NATO ally came up to me and said, well, in my country, we aspire to reach the depths to which you say you have sunk in the United States. So it could be worse, but it could also be better. And what explains that civil-military tension is competing conceptions of how the relationship ought to go. There's a military conception of the proper norms, and it's different from the civilian conception. It's a dialogue of the deaf, with each side failing to see how the other side's preferred way ought to go. The military conception is that there should be bright dividing line between what is the civilian role and what is the military role. Civilians are responsible for strategy, and then implementation, execution, operations, and tactics. Those are the responsibility of the military. Civilians have a right to make their decisions in their zone, but then they should not be bothering the military in making its decisions. The way a general explained it once was, civilians should tell us where they want to go and leave the driving up to us. The problem is that civilians do not conduct their relations that way. Civilians want to draw a dividing line, but draw it way on the side of the zone that the military say is theirs. The military want the civilians to play by the rules of the game, but the civilians keep changing the rules of the game. Indeed, civilians get to decide what the game's going to be on any given day. And this competing conceptions of the norms creates the friction that leads to civil-military concern about civilian control. You may say that the military way is a better way, the military way is right, but in a democracy, civilians have a right to be wrong. Here's why I'm telling you this at a Duke Forward event. Because right now, Duke is the best place in the world to study and think about these issues. Duke has enormous advantages over its rivals, particularly location. There are very few elite schools closer to Washington, D.C., and the center of civil-military activity than Duke. And there's no elite school that is closer to major military installations than Duke is. Stanford will never be as close to Fort Bragg and the 82nd Airborne and the elite Army SOF units that are based in Fort Bragg than Duke is. And because of its location, Duke is a destination for veterans spending their GI Bill, and also active duty military taking a year off to further their studies. Right now, we have military fellows taking their 1 year of senior service equivalent at Duke, sitting in the classes side by side with Duke undergraduates. It's the 1% who are fighting the war sitting next to the 99% who are not fighting the war, and explaining to them what the war means. Duke also has retired chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Martin Dempsey, himself a Duke alum, and now a Rubenstein Fellow at Duke. And he and I this spring taught a course on civil-military relations, exploring these topics in detail. Duke also has the American Grand Strategy Program, which is raising the next generation of strategists by interacting with the current one. Just this year, the AGS program brought to Duke Dennis McDonough, the White House Chief of Staff, Tom Donilon, the retired National Security Advisor, Wendy Sherman, the lead negotiator on the Iran nuclear deal, and many others. And these leading statesmen and women, when they come to Duke, they give a public talk, but they also meet in small group sessions with Duke students, where the Duke students challenge them, pepper them with questions, and yes, get their emails for follow-up networking, growing their national security careers even now while they are undergrads or graduate students. The AJS program grows students in one further way: staff rides. A staff ride is where you visit a battlefield, and the battlefield is the textbook. And the students and alums, when they come along, are the teachers. Each student or alum that comes on the staff ride has researched the role of a key figure in that battlefield. And when it comes to their place on the battle, explains to the rest what's going on. Imagine that you're at Gettysburg, at the foot of that long field. You are the student playing General Pickett, and you are explaining to the rest of the students why it makes sense to try to cross that field when the artillery is visible there on the left. Last year, we took a group of students to Normandy, to the beaches of Normandy, and did a staff ride of the D-Day invasion. Just this January, we went to Grenada and had students and alums role-playing this inter-service rivalry that bedeviled the U.S. invasion in 1983. And next year, we're heading to Vietnam, where we'll do a staff ride of the Tet Offensive. I'm this close to persuading President Broadhead to come along, and I've told him that he can play Ho Chi Minh if he persuades Cindy to play Jane Fonda. What the staff rides and all of these activities do is they grow in the participants what is absent in the civil-military relationship: empathy and understanding for how the other side sees it. Empathy from military officers seeing how the decision looks to senior civilian leaders. Empathy, more crucially, in civilian leaders as to how their decisions look, feel, and sound to the military. There's an empathy gap in American civil-military relations. I've given a version of this talk to thousands of senior military officers. This is the first time I've given it to an elite civilian audience outside of the classroom. You all are the civilians who will choose the next commander-in-chief. Some of you will advise them. Some of you may even be the senior leaders in this civil-military relationship. It's incumbent on you to think and wrestle with these issues so we can close the civil-military empathy gap. You can do this by coming on an AGS staff ride. We'd love to see you. But if not on a staff ride, go home and seize another person and say, have you thought about why we have 240 years without a coup in the United States? I have. Thank you.